Sales techniques and salespeople. Where have they been historically? Where are they today? And how do they need to evolve to stay successful, relevant, and impactful in the future? That is our conversation today, that and more. I'm David G., speaker, storyteller, author of the 3 Second Selling platform in Washington, D.C. Joining me from Seattle, Washington, is Leif Larson, serial entrepreneur. Welcome to the show, Leif.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Technologist, startup guy. I love this tagline, and this could work for any of us. A leader with a passion for small, simple solutions that yield big pain solutions. Love that. Small little things that yield big results. So we can all use that. But Leif is the general manager of Salesfolks. It's a platform that enables companies of any size, all sizes, to find, manage, and grow a virtual cloud-based sales force and function utilizing the gig economy. I should say, Leif and I used to live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was it was probably about 6 or 7 companies ago. It was a lot of years ago for me as well. I was the editor of a business magazine. I put Leif in the magazine for one of his earlier iterations, and then we both were members of a entrepreneurs organization. And I won't say we kept in contact since, but kind of kept tabs on each other, occasionally commenting on LinkedIn. And then Leif had me on his Sales Folks podcast recently, and I said, "Hey, we've got to come back and talk 3 second selling." So
Thank you. So glad to be here. And yeah, it was quite a gap with us not talking with each other, but I think that we just, really reconnected in such a fun way. It just takes me back many years ago to our discussions in Minnesota. And yeah, I'm really grateful to be a guest here on your podcast.
well, we are continuing that discussion with salespeople. How have they changed over the years? And the second, maybe more salient part is, have these changes in the vast majority of the salespeople kept pace with a changing audience and marketing environment where they really don't need sales and marketing people in the ways that people used to?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that clearly over the last couple of decades, we've been using technology to try and better facilitate the sales process, the sales methodology. So obviously, we've seen the advent of CRM, customer relationship management systems, and in trying to monitor and curate customers or prospects, I should say, that are within the pipeline, and making sure that you're monitoring that sales development process through each one of the stages. So technology obviously has been a big part of the evolution process, but when we get into the actual human aspect of sales and selling, um, it's I think that there's been an advent of trying to employ specific methodologies, where in the old days, I think salespeople were a little bit more generalized and they would cover all aspects of the stack. I think that you've seen the evolution occur in the development of specific sales roles within the sales stack. So you have people that now specialize in doing lead generation. You have people who are specializing in business development, sales development, representatives, BDRs, SDRs. You have people who are very proficient at actually doing demonstrations with the customer. So actually walking them through product feature sets. You have people who are just amazing closers, and you have sales engineers, people who are very technical in nature that can work with their prospect counterparts to try and check boxes technically. And then, of course, now you have post sales process, and a lot of companies investing in sales success with customers and thinking about how do they retain these customers or potentially go back to those customers as a source of net new sales. And so you've definitely see role development evolution occur with specialization happening. The truth is that um, there's no scarcity of information around products and services, David. The internet has basically curated most of the information that customers need. It's just out there. And so very often customers today come into our sales funnels from the side. And um, they typically have done a fair bit of due diligence. So presuming or operating under the assumption that you're starting with a prospect that's coming at the top of the funnel can really be a mistake. And I think that that's another big part of this evolution that we're going through is for, basically a couple thousand years of selling on this planet. There was scarcity around a product or service until someone, was there, this gatekeeper, some form of a salesperson was there to um, uh, uh, give you the information you needed around making a buying decision. And that's different today with all the information that customers have. And so, what the the premise that I operate under and what I've seen, particularly in the evolution over the last 2 or 3 years here, is that great salespeople are no longer just doing solution selling. Believe it or not, the great salespeople are honing their skills around problem finding. It requires a tremendous amount of curiosity. It requires the ability to formulate precise strategic questions. Um, what you're trying to do is learn where the prospect is at in their discovery process and what problems that they're trying to solve for, and things like why haven't they made a buying decision yet, and what does a picture perfect purchasing outcome look like? Not just what is the solution that they think they need look like, but what happens once they buy that. What does success mean for them? And I think that's really what the big evolution we're going through right now is. It's about not just problem solving; it's about problem finding. And in my email signature, just this year here in 2023, I adopted a new component to my job title and my email signature, and I use the phrase "sales detective." And I know that it sounds a little funny, but it's very true. We really want to hone our interview skills to have prospects describe in their own words what they're trying to accomplish. And um, without collecting that data and doing that problem finding, we're making a lot of assumptions that can and often can and often will be wrong. So I think of this evolution of where we're at today is really one of more of a fact finding exercise or capability for salespeople. I'll just mention one last comment here on evolution. Another problem is that salespeople hold on to their tacit and explicit knowledge too tightly. Um, uh, this is a very human thing. I think that we look at this information as differentiators for us, and so it's not unnatural to hold on to knowledge. And tacit knowledge, by its very definition, is unspoken knowledge, and so it's not. Uncommon for us to want to protect what knowledge we have, to set ourselves apart and to continue to have what we perceive as value or worth, being worthwhile. In the sales area, um, salespeople tend to sell on features when in fact they could use their unique knowledge to inform and educate customers about benefits to a given product or service. And oftentimes, the customer may think that they need solution X when in fact they would be better served with solution Y. And so the evolution that I'm also seeing happen here is that top performing sales professionals are teaching prospects. They're very educational, and it's not about a product or service in question, but more about significant business problems, new ideas, teaching, educating about astute observations. And so those top salespeople they realize they have this tacit and explicit knowledge that they contain, and they're almost repackaging that as a strategic differentiator in how they redeploy that back to the customer versus holding on to it tightly. And so they end up subsequently being less prescriptive, like you need this, and they're more educational and consultative about sort of the problem solution matrix that the customer, the client may be operating in.
You articulated about 50% of my speeches and presentations, which affirms to me that that I'm on the right path. I just incorporated some new information in my very last speech we were just talking about before we went on the air here. And that is, instead of the old telling and selling, spewing out stuff about us, our products, our features, our specs, what if instead, and I love what if questions, what if instead we lead a prospect or client through discovery process, asking skilled questions at the right time, wrapped in stories, because we remember those 22 times more often. What if we lead them through a process of discovery and uncover pain points they didn't even know they had? How does that position us as salespeople? It's no longer just a product peddler. We're now become, elevated to an advisor, an authority, a valued partner. And that's such a valuable thing. And I just had created a couple videos around that speaking engagement saying, I came across a factoid, I think it was from Salesforce, that top producing salespeople ask 40% more questions than average to poor performing salespeople and talk about their features and specs and products and themselves 63% less. So talk less, ask more, sell more. That's the takeaway, isn't it?
It really is, and I'm not surprised that we've independently arrived at some of these sets of questions. We're both students of the game and researchers here, and I think that we're we're finding that there's these common traits amongst those high performing salespeople that others can and should know about. It'll still be up to you to try and employ integrate and employ some of these tactics into your own sales profession. But absolutely, we are really starting to identify some of these things that are leading to better production.
So, if we know that we can't reason our way to a sale, and if we know that we have to create an emotional connection, earn someone's time and attention to put ourselves on the path to sales success, why are so many people still stuck in the old fashioned telling and selling? I go to a trade show and walk up and down the aisle and hear all the variations on the same old time worn themes. I go to a lot of boat shows. I have clients in the recreational boating industry. I hear the same thing. It's this long, it's this wide, it has this many cup holders, this much horsepower. I go car shopping. I walk in. The salesperson doesn't take me on a discovery process. He says, "What are you looking for?" I tell him. He says, "Well, okay, we've got this color, this trim package," and next thing you know, we're on a test drive. And it, as you say, it may not even be the product that we need, but we just automatically kind of go to features and specs. Why, when we know that's not the way our brains are wired to make a sale? Why are we stuck there?
I do think that the answer, is nuanced. Um, Part of it is that we like the sounds of our own voice. I think that there's a lot of ego tied up into it, and we tend to sort of overshare information, assuming that somehow with more of this information up front, it's going to be compelling for the customer to want to stick around for the purchase. When in fact, I think what you've identified correctly is that integration of storytelling into the model can uh, be really, really helpful because of these, tribal instincts that we have around the conveyance of information that go back, uh, a long time. It's just a better way to share the information. But I also think that we tend to get a little bit focused, overly focused on the specific objectives and outcomes that we have at the expense of the specific objectives and outcomes that the customer has. And that's why you end up seeing salespeople who oversell, and are spending that 60% of their time talking instead of 60% of their time listening. um, those are just a couple of reasons why I think that we get there. Um, I also think that there's a certain amount of nervousness that some salespeople, they tend to be high energy, very passionate, very energetic, and um, they're not always comfortable with pauses. you know, it tends to be sometimes they get so into uh, what they're doing, and that passion, is can be well received by a customer, that you care, and that you find meaning around the particular thing that you're representing. But at the end of the day, if you're not leaving openings for the customer to have that engagement, it ends up becoming a very one-sided proposition. And I think that that's where it becomes a turnoff, for customers, because they too want to participate in that conversation. They want that to be bi-directional. So learning to take pauses and breaks, I think, is another thing that even good salespeople could practice a little bit more.
That's an interesting point. I've not heard that articulated that exact way. I come from a TV news background, and dead air is not a good thing in the world of television, but I like being able to build it in a little bit to the sales process and just letting your words breathe, pausing a little bit. We do have that. We do have a tendency to want to, hey, if I just give you enough reasons, you being the smart person you are, then you'll conclude that we should do business. And again, that's just not the way our brains are wired. And one of the things I love about the question asking and taking the client or prospect through the discovery process is that can oftentimes lower sales resistance. They can conclude before you even have to get to the close of the ask yourself. They can self close and they can come to the conclusion that should work with you. And that's one thing when it comes to, I think I'm pretty good at selling myself for the most part, but I'm not transactional. And I really, really don't like salesy things like the close and the ask. And if I can have somebody say yes before I have to ask them if we can do business, yeah, that's all the better for me. I really appreciate that. So we may have touched on it already in terms of listening, asking questions, letting our sales interactions breathe. But what do you consider the most undervalued characteristic of a successful salesperson?
Their recognition of speed. So every single sales opportunity that exists worldwide, there is a decay rate to it, and you need to think about it in that context. What is an opportunity now very much can dissipate or even disappear tomorrow, and there, um, your ability to convert a customer falls off a cliff, um, from that second that the prospect self-identifies. Why? There really isn't any scarcity in terms of customer choice, when it comes to how they can go about solving their problem. If you think that you don't have any competitors and you're wholly unique in the marketplace, you're just fooling yourself. you know i I think it's become even hard to invent new products and services, because whatever you think you invented, this great new mousetrap, surely some kid in a basement someplace has also just invented that thing. I mean, it's just what happens in a world where the population's 8 billion. Like, everything exists out there, and it's readily available at all places, all times. So there really isn't that scarcity there. um so often, the first who responds to a customer opportunity has a better chance of winning that business. And so, whether you respond in 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, that can have a dramatic impact on the probability of conversion. So, I think that that's an undervalued characteristic, is the clock speed of your time to response, and that's something that I think really smart sales orgs are constantly working on, is that time to response. So that's one that I'll give you. Secondly, another undervalued characteristic, that I'm just going to double down on, because you're talking about this, and I just have to double down on, is listening more than you're talking. Folks, there is research-based evidence that top 20% of sales performers are outperforming the bottom 50% of professionals combined, and they're spending about 60% of their time listening to customers, about 40% of their time talking. In the old days of sales, there was a lot of showmanship, there was a lot of hand waving involved with sales. That isn't the case any longer. Active listening is the most underdeveloped skill of most of us salespeople, and yet, for those who hone that skill, it is a remarkable superpower. So I know, David, you mentioned it. I know this is something you've really keyed in on, and I just wanted to double down on that because I wholly agree with you on that. Totally undervalued characteristic, and one that you're never perfect. You never have mastery of that, but rather you're constantly a work in progress. And so having some humility around that, and checking yourself from time to time and saying, how did that conversation go with that prospect or that customer, and did I hear them out? Was I listening? Was I doing active listening? Was I asking good questions? Doing that constantly is going to be a huge boon to your success.
Being an author, that has a book called Amplify Your Audience, and he has an acronym LOVE. It's listen, observe, validate, and empathize. And I think that that's a pretty good starting point. I often say my mom is best listener I've ever met. She's non-judgmental. She listens. She doesn't interrupt, and just helps me guide or guide me through this. Well, it's a process of discovery. Well, I hear you saying this. Let me, why don't you expound a little bit on this? So I love that. And I try to bring, I was an entertainment reporter for several of the years that I was a TV news reporter and anchor, and try to bring in those stories from those junket interviews for feature films to my talks. And I remember asking, I've been using Meryl Streep. I asked her, so tell me the number one most important characteristic for a successful actor, and she said listening. So we think of it's emoting and going crazy. She goes, no, it's just someone who's not waiting. Obviously, we're following a script. It's someone who's not waiting for their turn to talk, but someone who's engaged, who's in the moment, who's actively participating in the conversation. She goes, listening is everything. So I love that. I love that. Conversely, the most overrated character trait or uh, uh, characteristic of a salesperson, successful salesperson.
This answer might surprise you, but I where I'm at in terms of my career trajectory within the sales sector, I just feel like I really need to talk about this one right now. And I think that that's about hitting your number. And I think that hitting your number is an overrated characteristic, not an underrated characteristic. And I know that that may sound absolutely crazy considering the fact that nearly 50% of all salespeople today do not hit quota. The idea that hitting your number or exceeding quota um, could be an overrated thing. I know that it sounds counterintuitive, but I think that um, hitting your number merely by closing deals in a given period is not the right place for the sales field to be right now. And hear me out on this. You see this mentality in the stock market, and I'm just trying to use this as a bit of an analog here, but in the stock market, all these companies today will literally do anything to hit their number for the quarter. And I think Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett have really talked about the all the downsides to short-term thinking, short-term goals, short-term performance goals. The short-term thinking is like friggin' kryptonite for building sustainable futures. And so salespeople that have the majority of their comp tied to short periods of time just simply aren't aligned towards the needs of customers or the businesses that they serve. And there's just, I find this sort of ironic. And instead, I'm hoping that we get back to a more sensible sales models where there's this symbiotic relationship between the comp slash upside and some relationship into long-term performance. And unfortunately, I feel like the pendulum has swung really far in one direction. The average sales turnover today in your sales department is about 16 months. So um, that think about that for a second. That's less than a year and a half. And so, of course, salespeople are going to be orientated towards short-term performance, but that just erodes continuity of a sustainable, incremental revenue generation engine, your revenue growth. And so my hope is that salespeople are going to stick around longer. Start to think of this. I think it was Reid Hoffman that had mentioned this, but he talked about the tour of duty. Like, come in and stay for some period of time, like 2, 3 years, 4 years, but pick a tour of duty and come in there and stay there. Um, uh, because I think, in short, here, if we go through a recession, I think that companies, smart revenue leaders are going to start sniffing out these people that are jumping, every 12, 14 months, and they're not going to want you. They're going to want people that are going to stick around there and see things through. And so start to think about your sales career as a tour of duty, and business owners, revenue leaders, start thinking about aligning their compensation not towards an immediate hand to mouth, performance number, but rather, what type of continuity of relationship are they building with that client, and then how do you economically remunerate salespeople based on long-term retention of those customers. Maybe it's a bit of an annuity model, but have some comp system where you're incentivizing the sales professionals not just for a single sale, but rather perhaps the lifespan of a customer. And we've had that at times in history where you could make a single sale and continue to monetize off of that as a salesperson over the lifespan of a customer. We really got away from that, and it's all been about short-term performance. And I think we need to rethink that a little bit.
Last question. We know that time and attention is in very short supply these days from our prospects and customers. They're time starved, in control as never before. The whole premise of 3 second selling is cutting through that clutter, creating those emotional connections, earning time and attention. So I share my secret sauce with my platform. What's yours? Tell me a little bit about how what advice you have for salespeople who are saying, "Ay, ay, ay, I just can't cut through the crowded, chaotic, cluttered landscape. I can't get up to bat."
So I hear this all the time, and especially the last 1 to 2 business quarters here. The amount of people reaching out to me with that has been epic. Yeah, it has been. There, signal versus noise is at an all-time high, and so um, you have to sort of reconcile the data. And so let's go back just real quickly in history here. So there was a time where, in the late 1990s, early 2000s, where you could do outbound email, even if it's cold email, and you could get response rates, in every 3 emails. 15 years ago, that was 5. 5 years ago, that was 10. Now it can take up to 25 messages to be able to get a customer to come into the top of the funnel. Why? Because we're all drowning in nonstop noise that's coming in here. And so you have two options. Either you increase frequency and accept that you're going to have many, many messages go out to any given prospect at large before you're actually going to finally connect and get through, or your other option is to really tighten up your messaging.
And that is a great place to end our conversation for part one of my conversation with Leif Larson, general manager at Salesfolks, technologist, inventor, startup leader, serial entrepreneur, and all around good guy. I have so enjoyed this conversation. I knew I would. Hopefully, you have as well. So, thanks for being our guest.
Thank you so much, David. Great to connect with you again.
Well, I'm David G., speaker, storyteller, and author of the 3 Second Selling Platform. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. So long, everyone.